See, are we seeing my screen?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
We're all good.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to the webinar. I think we've started. All right, I'm Chad Perkins, and with me on this amazing panel is Simon Walker and Ellie Wade and Julia Simone and Nick Haraz, which is the funnest last name. I don't know if we've talked enough about your last name, Nick, because it's Haraz. It's like multiple Haraz.
We haven't.
It's really fantastic. We should mention that every time, I think.
I think we should. Now that you've put it out there in the world, I don't think it can be taken away.
That's fantastic. All right, before we get started, we're going to be talking about titles today, but before we get started, we have some typical housekeeping things. If you go to maxon.net and the news drop down here, you can go to events and you can see all the many training things coming up. There are a host of them, always and always, so you can check these out. This session is also being recorded, and you could find it at the Maxon Training Team YouTube page. As you can see here, the past sessions that we've done, come back here and check those out. So again, it is being recorded. And also, we have a certification program. So if you want to get certified in Cinema 4D or Trap Code or Universe or whatever, you can take these certification tests and get certified. Another thing too is that we're giving away free t-shirts. So if you attend the session, you can get a free t-shirt. The code is 08 titles, 08 titles, all caps, and you can get a free t-shirt. The t-shirt is free, but the shipping is not, so you just have to pay for shipping. And one of these amazing pieces of wardrobe could be yours.
Is there a link in a supporting PDF for that, Chad, by any chance?
I'm gonna say yes. Is that? I didn't know there was a supporting PDF.
there happens to be, yes. It's inside the handout section. There's a special link that we've got for the free t-shirts. So the code actually unlocks that page rather than being a coupon code. A couple of people have asked over the few previous weeks about the difference between the two. So if you go into the handout section, you'll see a PDF which has that link in it and the password. I suppose it would be an appropriate thing. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, thanks for pointing that out. I've actually run into that myself and been confused because I went to just the regular Maxon merch store and tried to buy the t-shirt and it didn't work with the code. So you have to use the special link in the PDF and then the secret password 08 titles to get the thing once you click on the secret link in the PDF.
I just put the secret link out in the chat, just a FYI.
It's the opposite of secret, isn't it? If you're
Thanks.
sharing.
Yeah, but it sounds so cool though. If you say it's like a secret, you know, it's like, oh, I get a secret free t-shirt. Then it's like, I don't know. You feel like you're part of some cool club. That's how I feel anyway, so I think it's pretty cool. So one thing I just want to share really briefly, since I'm presenting and I can make those kind of decisions since I'm presenting. Last week, you know, we talked about title design, and it's such an interesting thing to me. I'm like, really, title design is just such a beautiful art form. And really there's two components, just like in all artistic things, you have form and function. And because this is, you know, software training, we're going to be spending the bulk of this month talking about the form of it. You know, we'll be talking about like beveling and materials and, you know, tracking and leading and kerning and things like that. But there's also the function, the art behind the title. And that's also a really important aspect of what's going on. And, you know, one of my favorite titles sequences is from The Man Who Knew Too Little, which is a Bill Murray movie. Any of you guys ever seen Man Who Knew Too Little? It's, yeah, right? It's hilarious. Bill Murray, it's a really, really great underappreciated movie. And the opening title sequence is like this like little cute cartoon sequence with this live action deal with these like nesting doll that's just kind of doing some interesting things like this. And it's, you know, from a form perspective, it's not really jaw-droppingly amazing. But from a function perspective, it's really important because at the end of the nesting dolls, we see at the end of the sequence of the nesting dolls, we see like a bomb placed, and then the rest of the movie, or they don't talk about the bomb, which ends up being like a key set piece in the finale of the film. We don't hear about that bomb until like way later. But without the title sequence, it would feel just kind of like not that big of a deal. But because the title sequence kind of sets the tone for this like bomb, then when we see it again, it's kind of like, oh, okay, like we were prepared for this. We know what that big thing was about in the beginning. And so it's not as gorgeous as a lot of other title sequences. Like it's not going to be on a list of like somebody's top 100 titles of all time. But, the function is really potent. So even though we're focusing a lot on the form of everything this month, I think it's also important to keep in mind the purpose that titles serve. And a lot of times when you're speaking to like a director, producer, or somebody who's hiring you to do titles, sometimes thinking above and beyond and taking a little bit extra time to think about how your titles could more specifically relate to the function of the movie, the art of the movie, that might be a way to get the job rather than, how sexy is the form of the thing that you're doing. Anyway, it's just a little thought that I had from last week. All right, so I think we're ready to turn it over to Julia and actually get into the meat and potatoes of this thing. Does that sound like where we're at? Okay.
Sure.
All right, so I'm
Yes.
gonna see if I can't throw this over to Julia.
Okay.
Did I do that successfully? Yay.
Yes, it's processing. Okay. You can see my screen?
Yes.
Cool.
Yep.
All right, I will make this large again. All right, so just to rehash, because I know my audio quality wasn't the best. I apologize for that last week. So I'm just going to briefly run through some of the things that I talked about, and then we'll jump into cinema. So as you can see on this PDF, basically, I've mentioned that having references and just having a library of images or even clips. For instance, I use Pinterest to organize all sorts of designs that speak to me that I think I can reference back to. If I'm creating a pitch board, then I can pull from these to show to the client what I'm thinking for their brief. And so there's just a whole combination. I also go around when I'm outside. I have my phone on me. Obviously, we all have phones on us all the time. And I think that applies for everything, whether you're doing lighting, texturing, no matter what 3D elements you're into. It's good to have real world references. So like storefronts and signage, or really anything, like if you're at a show, projections and stuff like that could be really cool as well. It's always good to just refer to that, because you're not really, when you're just straight up doing work in Cinema 4D, it might not, sometimes you might think like, well, doesn't quite look right. But if you refer back to some of these elements, you can be like, oh, the shadow here is really soft and smooth, so maybe like I need to go in and soften my shadows a little bit, and that might do the trick for what you're looking at. So yeah, so all of this is great, and references are really cool. This stuff is really great. So like real world, garage style, the anamorphic type, I'm always a big fan of it, actually. Love doing this stuff because it's just like a camera projection onto an environment that you build out in cinema. All right, I just like totally skipped over everything. So recent projects I worked on, brain games. Another thing that is important to note that I spoke about last week is clarity. When we're working with titles for shows or really anything, it's very important to have a very clear type, basically. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't make it like super elaborate where the legibility goes away. Like it has to be legible, and it has to be legible from far away as well. So if somebody just sees it on the screen somewhere, or on the example I used was a bus. So if there's like a bus going by and there's a billboard on the bus, you have to you have to be able to read it clearly. So just making sure that things are very legible is important when you're coming up with a title design. And keep your background for like the final and tag when you're landing your landing page. Keep your backgrounds really simple. Like they shouldn't be all super jarring, like with all sorts of stuff in there, cluttering up the screen, because then again you're taking away from the final second that your viewer is going to remember the title. So yeah, so this is a case study that I started talking about last week, and it was for a show called Weeds. Oh, I guess it was in the 2000s, like 2010, no, 2007. I don't remember, but anyways, it was an old show, and this is their logo or their title design here, and it was meant to be, I don't know if it came back, but it was coming back in 2019. And this was basically how I start my design process is I start laying out the type in Illustrator just to see which ones will work and kind of go from there. So as I mentioned before, this one didn't quite work because it was a little too intricate. So I went with something a little cleaner, and this is the first pass out of that exploration. So the first pass, I picked 2 fonts that I thought would be good for the show, and I put hair on this, C4D hair, to resemble grass. So this is, again, just like a really, really quick and dirty pass. This is not final by any means. And then this is the second font that I chose. So there were 2 fonts that were presented to see which one would work better for the show. We went with, so this is the second pass. And again, a little disclaimer, this is going to be really, really rough because this is done really quick. Just to kind of lay out the animation. So start thinking about how the animation will go, adding details, so like adding actual weeds in, having some dandelions, having clover. I'm actually a big fan of weeds, just like the weeds, like the the dandelions and all of that, because it's you can use it in a salad, and like being a forager, it's kind of cool to know all of this stuff is actually, it's good eating. don't, I mean, there's a lot to it, so don't just go out there and like start picking up weeds. But anyways, totally diverted there. Getting back on track. So again, just multiple camera angles, just this obviously needs a lot of work still, but it's more important at this stage to get the concept down, to kind of figure out your camera angles, figure out, how everything's going to flow, how things are going to be set up. So again, there's no compositing done on these frames. These frames are straight out of C4D using standard render, not Redshift or anything else. It's just standard render, just some lights thrown in, just so I can have a map of what the animation would look like. So I'd like to, usually when I do start working out some sort of a title animation, if there's no footage, in this case, there's no footage available to use. So most of the stuff will rely on the show type doing all the work. So this was like one approach to having a creative spot just using the title itself. So that would be, or this could also be like a bumper or something like that for, in between the other shows in the network. All right, so let's jump into cinema, and I'll show you how to use a really cool tool that I use for this, the scatter pen, which I think is really, really fun and can do a lot. So I'm just gonna move this out of the way. As you can see, there's how I like to lay my files out. I have different camera angles, so I can, get my kind of shots in place, boarded up. So when I'm doing boards, I can just, lay everything out with different camera angles, and then, yeah. So this is, again, this not composited yet. It will be composited, and there's still a few things that need to be fixed. But for these elements, let me get out of this and zoom in here, and I can show you more. So the dandelions and all this was done using Scatter Tool, a new feature in S24, which is so cool because before I used a plugin to do this, and now I don't have to, and it works so quick. So let me just quickly demo this guy. I guess we can use a text. So we'll just create a letter. I like to, so I'm just using just a regular text object. I'm going to go into my font. I always like, I guess it doesn't really matter. So let's do this one. That's nice. All right, and then the one thing that we should do also when we're dealing with any sort of modeling is turn on the lines here. So the second one from the top, just turn that on so you can see how your geometry is, I guess the what is it called? The vertices and things like that will function so that you know where you need to add more subdivisions. So right now, if we add anything here, this is treated as like one, I guess, mesh, just one whole clean surface. So you can't really do too much. You have to break it up. You have to subdivide it. So we're going to go into, actually, I'm also going to change my intermediate points for text just because adaptive doesn't really always work for me in the intermediate points down here for the objects. So I always change it to subdivided. And now we're going to go to caps. And then down here in the caps type, do regular grid. And now we can see that it has been subdivided. I'm probably going to stick with this just for, since, well, maybe I will. So if you drop this down here, you have the size of the grid, so you can change that. And I'm also going to change it to quad dominant. I don't know. I don't really like the process here. I don't know. Just maybe I'm old school like that. So size, change that. Maybe I'll change that to 5. That looks a little cleaner. And again, just because we're doing the surface of this, I'm not too concerned about the sides, subdividing the sides. So this looks okay. Obviously, we can go in and create a bevel, which I do like to do. Just do like a small little bevel to just give a little light to like catch the light a little bit. But in this case, because we're adding all sorts of things to it, I'm not sure if it's needed. So it's kind of like those decisions you have to make as you're preparing your model. So yeah, I'm just gonna make it 0 for now because we don't need that. Okay. Now I'm going to make this editable. So I'm just gonna press C, and now it is not editable. Let's see if we can actually use this as is. I don't know. I've never tried it. This is gonna be the first. If I can do it to the live type, but I guess we'll see if it works. All right. So other cool feature, the new one to S24 is Asset Browser. I mean, it was around obviously before, but it's just moved to this location as opposed to being over here. So now it's in this location, and obviously the really neat thing is that you don't have to actually download the whole asset browser content like you did before, which was always, you know, like I had to tell my students all the time, like, okay, now, you know, make sure to download this on your computer so you have it all. But now, now it's all in the cloud, so you only have to download the elements that you need, which I think is wonderful. So let's go and find, let's go to objects, and we'll find plants here. There's plants down below. There's also obviously tons and tons and tons of other content here to go through. And grass elements, and we're gonna go with low resolution. And we have all these grasses and weeds and whatnot here. So I'm going to download the dandelion. All right, so now we have this guy. Now we're gonna go up here. No, yeah. So up here at the top, if you hold down your mouse button, there'll be the scatter pan, and that's what we were looking for, the scatter pan. And let's see if this actually, oh yeah, so that worked, cool. I don't need to convert it to editable object, so that is excellent. So all you have to do is just start creating this outline, and it just starts scattering it on top of your shape. You can also, so in the scatter object, you can adjust your radius so they're closer together. Not closer together, but the object spacing will make them closer together. So yeah, object spacing, if you turn it down, you'll have obviously a lot more. And you can also randomize it, which is really neat. And you just, create a whole bunch of them. I think you have to select the dandelion, right? Yeah. So very neat. And then obviously, you can go in again, back into your content browser, find different piece of geometry and do the same thing. So we have wild grass now, and we're gonna go back into our scatter pan. Oop, nope, it's going the wrong way. Let's go back to our other view. All right. And then we'll just create more grass here. So yeah, so this is what I used for to scatter the, hold on a second, the weeds on the other type. So as you can see here, they're in all randomly positioned, and it works really great with, mixing it up when you're adding grass in. It just makes it a little bit more interesting as opposed to what we had before, which was, let me make that bigger, which was fairly plain and, it didn't really have as much visual interest in it. So it just looked like grass. It didn't look like weeds, it looked like grass. So adding those like additional elements, little like nuances to it, elevates the design more. Again, this is not composited and straight out of Cinema using standard render. I will be compositing it and updating the PDF, in which case, at which time I will share the final with you guys. So that is all for what I wanted to cover today.
Awesome. Julia.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, go on, Nick. I had a question too. I'll let you go first.
Oh, I just wanted to mention that there was a comment from Eric a little bit earlier on, Julia, just about how he's pulled some of your work examples for work he's done, and he didn't realize it was yours.
Oh, huh.
That was it. He was just like, yeah. So it's kind of when you were showing the work earlier. I think that Simon might have the same question I do. There was someone in the chat who had mentioned what sites do you use to essentially test out fonts, or do you have resources where you do test out fonts before purchasing them?
Oh, yeah, there was actually quite a few, but I used to use them, but it was a long time ago. Now I just use Adobe fonts because they have so many on the Adobe Creative Cloud. And you can just go on there and
that's the link I added in, actually.
Okay.
I did have another question, but
Oh, did you?
My mind as well.
And yeah, I could add on to Adobe Fonts is pretty great. They have now case studies with font pairings directly on Adobe Fonts where they show examples of them in different graphic designs. So you could then sort of visualize a font and font pairings. So that's one way to do it before purchasing it. I would add one more resource, which is something called TypeWolf. And it's a guy who writes a blog, and he absolutely loves type and has tons of articles on the 100 best type fonts for 2021 and all different purposes, including animation. I'll add that to the chat too.
All great reference resources.
That's really cool. I just looked at that site, typewolf.com. That's really interesting. Plus what's trending as well with the designs. And that's linked to the question I wanted to ask you, actually, Julia, is that once you go through a number of these iterations, how do things then change typically when you start having to involve the client and having those conversations?
Well, it's important to involve the client at the start. I found that having that open communication helps prevent, well, I mean, there's always going to be some little like minor hiccups because you never know who's actually is a client, you know, because you have someone speaking for the client, but then you're not sure who's like the big bosses. But having that communication open early, I think is a really good idea, just to kind of like being like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. And I think when you're pitching for, you know, when you get the brief and you're pitching, you're already opening that communication. So you already explained what you're thinking, what your design is, what your goal is. And if they signed on to that, from then on, it's more just, you know, nitpicking, like just figuring out, you know, maybe they have some constraints, maybe they have, I don't know, like when they went through legal, like maybe the legal has some, you know, issues with like certain things. Maybe you can't show something, but that's just like more of a back and forth. And that's really important to have that back and forth. I found that when we just like kind of like surprise the client after so much work is done, that, you know, that sometimes doesn't work out in our favor. Also, just doing, like, if you are doing animation, having just rough passes of animation, just like, you know, gray, whatever, like just rough stuff, just send it to them, just so they are prepared for how the animation is going to work before you hit render. Because when you start rendering in Redshift and compositing, it's just so much work that's being done that could have been saved if the client doesn't like it or something like that by showing the animation beforehand, like a rough animation, like a work in progress. So yeah.
That's interesting, because that kind of, I had a follow-up question, but I think you've essentially addressed it in that the follow-up question was about how much time you put in for changes and alterations as a project carries on, and by time I mean budget, of course, but but perhaps,
that's a
as you're saying,
producer.
incrementally.
Yeah, the producer actually budgets that in. So when we submit the pitch, and I guess when we work out the contract, the number of changes they can make is usually in that contract.
Okay.
It's not like, oh, you get an infinite amount of changes. That's not how it works. They have a certain amount of reviews that they get, and that's pretty much it. You have a schedule. So producer writes out a schedule. They schedule reviews. You follow those reviews, and if somehow, yes, like in a final review, they say, no, we don't like it, we want it to change, then there's additional cost to that. So that keeps the client in check.
Great. I mean, that's the key thing, having those agreements ahead of time. I'm sure many of us have been in a situation where things have changed exponentially, and we wished we'd organized it before. That's a very sensible, organized way to do it.
Yeah, scheduling reviews is very, very important. It keeps the designers on track. We talked about having deadlines. Those are very important. So having those reviews is very important for just progressing along and moving along on both sides. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Nick and Chad, did you have you do have an order and a plan for things for this session? Are there any things you want to add before we jump over to the next section?
I'm good.
Yep. How about you, Ellie?
I'm good, right? I'm good too. I know Ellie has some exciting stuff to share.
I do. There was one quick question. I have also answered it in the chat because I think I know the answer. But Julia, did you separate the top cap from your text geometry at all? Looking at the objects manager, I would say no, but that question came in, so I thought I'd ask.
No, I've created a selection tag for the two.
Yeah, cool. Also, a tip, if you use the text object, make it editable, and then connect objects and delete, you get given all your selection tags. So to the person who asked the question, that is a way of getting access to all your selection tags automatically.
Yeah.
Text.
And a question just came in the chat for you, Julia, just about, do you find that the default kerning settings on most fonts are okay, or do you find yourself changing it?
I change it. Yeah, pretty much all the time. Like this was changed. Yeah, I mean, it's just a byproduct of working with type. You have to change it sometimes, because sometimes I think, I'm not sure which one here was a little far apart. So yeah, that's one of those things that we do have to do, yes. Yeah. But Cinema 4D, if you're just creating type within Cinema 4D, has an excellent tool to do that. So it's really cool. That I showed last Monday.
Cool. So shall I think it's you next, Ellie, isn't it? Shall I
Is it
throw
me?
the screen over to you?
Yeah, sure. Is anyone after me? I'm just trying to.
I don't think so. I think you're
You're the finale.
the grand finale. Yeah.
Sounds good. Right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let me just move this out of the way. Okay, cool. So I have like a bunch of different things to show. We'll see what we get to. So I thought I'd show a couple of different ways of kind of editing your text. So last week, we looked at how we can actually create 3D text and 3D geometry inside of Cinema 4D. So now let's make it look cool. And then also we're going to have a look at like Redshift in a little bit as well, I think. I'm just looking at the time. So let me just grab some text. And I'm going to be really imaginative and just write the word text in it. Right, so I'm going to find like a nice kind of bold font, just so we have like a good surface area for the things that we want to do. And I quite like this one here, nice and bold. Okay, so one very quick way of kind of messing with our text could be to use a displacer, which is a deformer inside of Cinema 4D. You could then add like a noise shader here, and then you make the displacer a child of the text. That is one way, one really quick way, but we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to create a similar-ish effect with a lot more control using the volume builder. And when we use a volume builder, we have access to things called filter layers. And in filter layers, we have access to fields. And so we can create some really interesting looking kind of like stylized text, which we can then animate with fields. So I've got my text. And what's great is our text is going to stay procedural. So we can change that at any point and it's all going to update in real time. So up here, I'm going to grab my volume builder and I'm just going to drop my text as a child of my volume builder. And it's going to go super pixelated, which is fine. And then we're going to grab a volume mesher. Then our volume builder goes into our volume mesher. And it looks super blobby and weird. But if we go into our volume builder, this is because our voxel size at the moment is 10 centimeters. So it's quite big. So the way to think of it is it's a very low resolution mesh at the moment. So all we need to do to bring our detail of our text or any geometry back, we just have to lower this voxel size. So if I'm not going to go too crazy, I'll go to 1 centimeter for now. We can go lower, which we might do, but for now, because I want things to happen a little bit quicker, I'm just going to leave it on 1 centimeter. So now we have like our volume mesh. And so once we have this, we can now take advantage of our filter layers. So inside of this option here, we have our SDF filter layers. So we have smooth, dilate, erode, and close and open. And these all do like a bunch of different things. And you can even, right click, go to show help. And if we go to like filter, we can see our filters here, and you can see kind of visually exactly what these different options do dependent on your offset. So what we're going to do, we're going to go with dilate and erode so we can create sort of this slightly eroded text. Let me just get rid of that. So we're going to grab a dilate and erode, and if I switch this off and then back on, we can see our text just kind of like puffs out a little bit. And that's because, let me just pull this up so we can see this. We have an offset of 5 centimeters at the moment. We're going to adjust those settings in a little bit, but for now, we're just going to look at the fields tab. So we're inside of our dilate, so we're inside of our volume builder, inside of our dilate and erode. We then have this fields tab, and now we have access to all of our normal fields that people kind of traditionally use when, you know, using like MoGraph effectors and stuff like that. And so let's grab a random field. And so the random field is using this random noise, which is all we have access to all of our Cinema 4D noises in here. And then it's kind of like using the dilate and erode filter to affect the mesh of our text inside of our volume builder. So I'm going to set my noise type to this nuttiest because I think it looks quite cool. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to scale it up a little bit so we have kind of these larger kind of pieces of like noise happening. So I'm going to set it to something like 350%. And so this effect already is looking quite cool, and it's on our mesh. So if we go to, you know, our shaded lines, we can see that our mesh itself is actually being affected. Because we're using fields, because we have access to all of our different field options, we have access to what are called modifier layers as well. So if I click this, if you use like, I don't know, vertex maps, you can create a growth with the freeze. You can use the delay to create sort of like an echo effect of like an animation. And then the curve, if we select curve, it gives us this kind of like spline graph here. And then we can adjust this this spline to really perfect or choose how we want this random field noise to be affecting our text. So by default, if I click one of the points, we have these like Bezier handles, but I actually want my spline preset to be linear, and I'm going to draw it in a shape of like a triangle. So if I right click, we can go to spline presets, and I can change it to linear. And then if I control click anywhere on my spline, I get an additional point. So now I'm going to basically like reshape this into a triangle, and we're going to see that it's going to have a bit of an impact on how this noise is looking. So if I pull this up to the top, and then pull this one just down here, and then I'm just going to right click, go to select all. I'm just going to pull this across. Right click. There we go. And so now we're kind of choosing a specific area of this random field noise onto our text. So if I switch that off and switch that back on, we can see it's having like quite a strong impact on our text. So what we can do now, so because we're using these this field menu, we can then kind of animate this effect happening if we wanted to. So we could come and we could grab a linear field, then we can animate our linear field kind of across and animate this effect, or any effect that you've created. It doesn't just have to be this dilate and erode, and you can just animate that in and out with a linear field if you want to. Just going to remove that now. So what else I'm going to do? I'm going to come back to my dilate and erode, and instead of being in my fields tab, I'm going to go to my filter tab, and I want it to look like, so I like this noise effect, but I want it to look like it's eroding my text as opposed to kind of like looking like a bit of a growth on it at the moment. And all I have to do is set my offset to a negative value, and it's going to then take it away from my text. So let's go -3. Now, now if we sort of come in here, we can see that it's now taking this this random field, this noise that we've created, this noise effect, and it's now taking it away from our text, creating like a bit of like an erosion effect. We can perfect this even more by, you know, increasing our iterations, and then we get like a more detailed erosion. And then what we can also do is, if you find it's still kind of, the geometry isn't smooth enough, we can still lower our voxel size. Let's go to something like 0.5, and it's going to have a think about it. There we go. And now we get like a much cleaner mesh. But the important thing to note, the lower the voxel size, the kind of slower Cinema 4D will be. So for now, like, this is absolutely fine. But I mean, if we were looking at then like animating some stuff, or if we had like a whole load more text, it might end up being a little bit slower. So yeah, so that was a way I wanted to show of kind of stylizing your text by using the volume builder and by using fields, which might be sort of a technique that people haven't necessarily seen before. And as I was saying, yeah, what's handy is this is like you know, procedural, so we can just come in and we can write hey, and it's gonna update, and it has the same effect on there. And if we had animation on there, it's kind of everything's created in a non-destructive way, which might be useful. Cool. So what I also wanted to show was using some sculpting preset brushes to create similar kind of effects. So like create like cracks that we can basically sculpt and draw onto our text. So the way that we can find these, so unfortunately, these sculpting brush presets are not in the asset browser, but all you have to do is go into the main Maxon website. Under support, we then have this downloads option. And if we go to learn more, under Cinema 4D 24, we have this sculpt brushes drop down. And then you just have to download this file, which then gives you this .lib4d file. And all you have to do is put this in your 24 library browser, and then just restart Cinema 4D. And then you have access to these sculpt brush presets inside of Cinema 4D sculpting tools. So let's have a look. Let's pull out our text, and I'm just going to delete all of this. So let's go to our sculpting layout, because that's going to give us all the tools we need without having to go up into the sculpt menu every time. Let's get the sculpting layout, and our objects kind of manager can still be found, but it's just on this second tab here, and we have our text. So what you might notice is we don't actually have access to any of the tools, and that's because when we're sculpting, whatever we're sculpting has to be editable. So unfortunately, we can't work with non-editable text. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to duplicate this text, because there's something we're going to have to do before we're able to sculpt. So I'm going to make my text editable. So the way that we do that, I'm just going to hit the C key, and then it's going to give me kind of a whole bunch of like drop downs, but all we have to do is right click, connect objects, and delete. Then we have our text, and we have what I was saying earlier, access to all of these selection tags that Julia was using in her scene. So it does them like automatically for you, which is super handy. So now this is a polygonal object. We have access to our sculpting tools. And what you'd want to do, so if we go to display shading lines, you're going to want to subdivide whatever you're sculpting, because then it gives you a nice dense mesh, allowing you to, you know, really kind of draw or sculpt onto your object or text. So I'm going to hit subdivide a few times, and we haven't done a step yet. So let me hit subdivide. And so it's looking kind of weird. And that was because we didn't do what Julia did, which was set up our subdivisions. So that's an important thing. Before we make our text editable, we need to make sure we've set up at least enough subdivisions to warrant us subdividing ready to sculpt. So let me just delete that. I'm also going to have it stop saying hey, because I totally forgot I didn't change it back. And we're just going to, you know, add some subdivisions. So we'll go regular grid, do the exact same thing, quad dominant, and I'm going to maybe set this to like 5 centimeters. I'm then going to change my points to subdivided and just sort of like up them on my depth as well. So that's fine. It doesn't need to be anything like too hectic, but as long as it's enough to like hold its shape, when we then subdivide ready to sculpt, it's all going to be good. So out of habit, if I ever make my text editable, I always like to just save a copy. That's just a personal thing that I like to do. So we're going to then hit our C key again. We're going to right click. We're going to go connect objects and delete. And we're going to get access to these. I'm not going to keep my selection tags. I'm just going to delete them because I don't need them for this. We're then going to hit subdivide quite a few times. And the important thing to note, the more you subdivide your mesh, the kind of cleaner and clearer your kind of sculpting is going to be on this. I'm just going to go back to our shading. And now we can start to use some of our sculpt preset brushes. So if I just hit draw, under my settings, here is where we can load our brush presets. So once you've, you know, downloaded your lib4d file off of maxon.net and then put it into your Maxon Cinema 4D library browser folder, you should then be able to just hit load and have access to those presets. There's a whole bunch of different ones, you know, you've got cracks, you've got like different types of like animal skins and stuff like that. I'm just going to stick to sort of putting some cracks on our text. So I'm going to grab cracks 03. And once we've done that, under this stamp tab, it's going to automatically then load that one for you. And the only other thing you're going to want to do, ideally, is check this use fall off. And if we watch this little display preview here, it's just going to kind of blend those outside areas so you don't see kind of like the circle brush mark. So that's going to help you out. So if I just come in here, I'm just going to do this on this X. And I'm just going to click and hold, and I'm going to start to draw. And basically, we're just drawing these cracks onto our text. Then we can come back to settings. You know, we can choose then a different crack, do the same thing, go to stamp, go to use fall off, and then just sort of draw these on exactly how you'd want them. And the handy thing with sculpting is it's controlled by you. So I'm choosing exactly where I want these cracks to be, how big I want them to be. So it has got its upsides. Its downsides is if we have like a really dense mesh and we're starting to sculpt a lot of stuff onto it, it can be like a very heavy scene. So that could be a bit of like a negative. And then of course there's no way of like editing the text as well, which could be another kind of slight con. And then you can, you know, use your other sculpting tools just to kind of edit this a bit more and get some nice like deformation going on. And yes, so yeah, that's where you would find the sculpting preset brushes. And yeah, to make this clearer, you would just have to subdivide again, and then you'll get like a higher resolution on these brush presets. Cool. Any questions before I then go? I'm going to show a little bit in Redshift.
Ali, there were a couple questions about the sculpting brush. One was related towards, in the chat from Sean, what kind of pressure support is there supported for sculpting regarding, let's say, surface tablets like a Wacom?
That I do not know because I am just using a mouse. I'm sorry.
You're just using a mouse? Okay.
Yeah.
And the second question was, is the sculpting itself done as a tag to be able to apply the sculpting deformations to another object? Or is the modeling, is it modifying the polys of the mesh?
So it is modifying the polys of the mesh, but it's also stored in this tag. Do you know, I haven't actually tried to just move the tag to another text. Let's try that. Let's see if that's something we can do. So this is, let me just make this editable and then connect objects and delete. Let's see if this works. No, so it's not a tag that you can then reapply to other text.
Got it. So it's a tag that's just created when you start sculpting.
Yeah, so as soon as you hit that subdivide and then start to like draw on it, it then generates this sculpting tag for you.
Gotcha.
But yeah, sadly, it's not stored in the tag for you to then drag and drop onto another. That would be handy though, wouldn't it?
Yes, feature request I see in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Shall I show a little bit of Redshift?
Yes, please,
Yes,
for
please.
me.
Yes, always.
Yes. How could I not? Okay, I'm just gonna go back to my my standard layout for this, and I've got my original text. Don't know what the subdivisions don't even matter for this one. So because we're going to be doing stuff inside of the texture. So far I've shown you a couple of different ways that actually affect the geometry itself. So the changes that we're making is physically to the mesh and to the geometry. And sometimes the downside of that is if we're doing like a lot of things with like a really dense mesh, it can be a little bit slower. And so there are other ways of stylizing and displacing our text or anything, any kind of objects inside of Cinema 4D. And that's by doing it within the materials itself. And that ends up being like a really faster way of doing these things because it's the material, it's not actually the geometry. So I'm just going to stick with this normal text that we've been using for the last like 15 minutes. And what I'm going to do, let me just get up my render view. And I'm going to just grab a dome light just so we can kind of see what's going on. And switch that off. I'm going to dock it just so we can, so it doesn't get in the way. And I'm going to just change my renderer quickly to Redshift. Cool. So, you know, it's not the most beautiful of scenes, but we're just going to see how we can start to create some additional kind of stylization and displacement within materials. So I'm just going to switch that off for now. I'm just going to create a standard Redshift material, and I'm going to drop that on there. And we're going to kick off our render view because any changes we make in this material aren't necessarily going to show in our viewport, especially things like displacement, but it's going to be showing in our either our IPR or our render view. And I like to work in the render view. So I'm going to open up my shader graph and I'm just going to pull it out so we can see, we want to see like everything that's going on, don't we? Because I want to be able to see the changes that I make. Okay, cool. So far, what have we got? We've just got a standard Redshift material node and our output node, and it's on our text. So I'm going to, just for speed, I'm going to stick to using presets and then a couple of textures for this. So in my Redshift material node, I'm just going to use the copper preset for this. And this is going to be the base color of our text. And what else? Let's grab another material node. And we're going to use this. I'm going to start off by creating like some scratches, some like scratch elements on our text. And we're going to use that same kind of scratch map to then create some additional displacement. So I've got my second material, and the second material is going to be the color of my scratches. And so again, for speed, we're just going to grab the iron preset, and we can just plug it into the surface to see what it looks like. And then inside the asset browser, so Julia was showing us, you know, we've got a whole bunch of really cool stuff inside this asset browser that you can just download straight from the cloud. And that includes a bunch of different like texture maps. So we have scratches, smudges, got like greeble maps, like some really cool elements in there. And I'm just going to use this scratch map. So I'm going to drag and drop it into my shader graph. And I'm just going to shut my asset browser so it doesn't get in the way. Cool. So how can we kind of mix all these things together inside of our shader graph? The way that we do that is by using a material blender node. If I just drag and drop that in, our material blender is going to allow us to define a base color, which is going to be our copper, multiple other colors, but we're just going to stick with a second color, which is going to be the iron material. And then we're then going to use this scratch texture map as sort of like a blending mask to blend between the two material nodes. So I'm going to plug my copper material into my base color. I'm going to plug my material blender into my surface. I'm then going to plug my iron material into my layer color 1. Then I'm going to plug my scratch texture into my blend color 2. And so we can now see that this is happening. However, the one thing I have noticed is we need to invert this texture because we have our colors kind of the wrong way around. That's because our blacks and our whites need to be, hit my mic then, need to be inverted. So if we grab a color invert, all we need to do is plug our texture into there and then plug that back into there. And now we have the our materials and our colors the right way round. Okay, let's get a little bit closer so we can see what's going on. So one tip I like to do when I'm using kind of either, like grayscale noises or black and white texture maps, I like to use a ramp to really kind of dial in those black and white values. So if I plug my color invert into my ramp, we just plug it straight into the input, and then that goes back into my blend color 1. We can then come down and we have this inside of the ramp, we have this black and white kind of gradient ramp. And if I start to pull my black values across, we're really upping the black values of this texture. What I'm going to do, I'm actually going to do the opposite. I'm going to pull the white values across. So we pull in more of those kind of white values and we get more of those, the scratch color in. Cool, so this is looking all right. But if we sort of move to the side slightly, we can see, this projection is looking a little bit weird. And there is actually a really quick way of fixing this. And it's by using just a simple node called the TriPlanar Node. And what we're going to do, we're going to plug our texture into our image X. And that's just going to go straight into our input. And it's going to fix that projection issue for us. Then we can even remap this texture in the TriPlanar. And so I ended up, when I was having a look at this earlier, I just changed these values to something like this. And I think the projection looks quite nice. Cool, so now we can take this entire section here and we can now use this as displacement on our text. So all we do is grab a displacement node and then we're going to plug that into the text map, and then our displacement plugs directly into our output. But nothing happens, and that's because we need to do one more step before we can actually see this displacement on our geometry. So I'm going to close my shader graph for now because I don't actually need it anymore. Everything is now set up. And on my text, I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to Redshift tags and Redshift object tag. And under the geometry tab, let me just pull this up, we need to override our geometry and then we need to enable our displacement. And now we have some displacement on our text that is it's super fast because it's all just based on this material node. And we can still come back into here and we can, just write the word like Maxon and it's all going to update in real time because it's all on a texture. And this was actually what I did. Oh my God, so I just realized it's for me 6 o'clock on the hour. sorry, one more thing I'm going to show quickly. So the hero image was this file. Oh, open. Oh, here we go. Cool. So yeah, this is basically what I did for the for like the hero shot. Was I just had some text, it said titles, and inside of here, it's basically just the same setup, just a little bit kind of more going on. So I have a diffuse and metalness texture in here, which is like this carbon fiber texture, which is our base material, which is plugged into our material blender. I then did the same kind of effect that we just did, which was grabbing a platinum preset and then using a scratch map, inverted into a ramp, into blend color. I then grabbed another material, which is then being kind of masked with this like smudge, and all of this is found in the asset browser. And then I used a greeble map into the displacement. It's also into the reflection roughness, and I plugged that into the displacement of my output. And I think, and it creates this really kind of interesting effect, which is, you know, super fast because it's all just in the texture. And again, we can, you know, we can come in, we can change our text line, and it's all going to update and just be on there. So yeah, a couple of different ways of stylizing slash deforming text in Cinema 4D.
That looks
amazing.
great, Ellie.
Sorry, I didn't realize it was over time.
That's awesome. Hey, is it possible? I know you get asked this all the time. Is it possible to distribute that file right there that we're looking at, the hero image file, or is there something
Yeah, no, that's fine.
sacred in it? Okay.
There's nothing, no, nothing sacred.
Okay.
Awesome. I think we have a shared link where we're posting these files, and if you don't have that handy, we'll definitely be posting it through our multiple channels for you guys to access that. It's a shared Dropbox link. There were a few questions here that came up in the chat, Ellie, too. I just wanted to make mention of. Rick was asking if you can add texture to the edges and corners as well of the text.
Yes. So was it on this particular one, or was it on? Which one have I got open? So let's go on here. So you can add. We were talking about selections earlier. Inside of the text, yes. You can go to selections, and if you had like a bevel and stuff, you have access to those selections, and they work with Redshift as well. So if I had a texture, for example, like this one on here, I could choose the edge selection and just type the code for it in there. And then you just, yeah, you can do that in there. So if that's cool, I hope that's it.
He didn't refer to which one it was, so I think, but that definitely is a way of adding
yeah, so
a material to the edges of your text.
Yeah, to like the specific areas. There's edge selections here, or there's the actual polygon selections. You know, if you have, like, I've not got a bevel on mine, so it's not giving me those ones. But as soon as you do, you then have those, and you don't even have to worry about like ticking them. All you have to do is go into here and you type in like the code for it. So for example, like C1, and it's going to be on there.
Cool. Aaron was just mentioning that the last 30 minutes has been Ellie Gold, and that you just keep on getting better and better, which is awesome. Hi. And it's true.
I'm glad it was cool and hopefully helpful.
Cool. I think I just have a few things to share just before we wrap up today, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
One more thing I want to throw in there.
Oh.
Two more things. One absolutely is Ellie Gold. We totally agree with that. But also Tom had as Aaron puts it, a loaded question about Mac versus PC and how do we feel as a panel about it. And I slightly facetiously put in there, it depends. But actually, if you read Aaron's response, which is quite a lot of information in that, and that we added into the questions and answers, which is a very even-handed explanation of the current situation, which is, I'll ask you all in a second what you think about this, but it is an interesting time to be a Mac owner in this switch over to the M1 chip. And of course, whilst Cinema and Redshift both support M1, you can't necessarily buy the same level of hardware that you can on the PC. And a lot of it is to do with the ecosystem. I know Jonas uses with his MacBook Pro with an Intel chip, an eGPU, so he can use AMD cards when he's doing Redshift stuff. And Ellie, you're using an iMac, aren't you, with AMD cards on it, Radeon cards?
Yes, 5700 XT. That's what's in here.
And also Lionel, one of our co-presenters on occasion, swears by his Ryzen and with lots of NVIDIA cards in it too. So to some extent, it depends on your setup and your ecosystem and what you need to do. If you want to stay on the Mac road, we also have heard that the equally spec'd Mac Mini and the 13-inch MacBook Pro perform very capably on a very similar basis until the heat or the cooling requirement kicks in. So we've seen that also, Aaron, as you mentioned about the MacBook Pro and the Mac Mini. So it's an open question, and I think it depends on preference largely and what you need to be doing. But what do we all think about this? I'll let you jump in there, Nick.
So in terms of my own personal use, I have definitely more use of both Macs and PCs on the Adobe eco side of things. And recently I found myself using a Dell a laptop, and I've been pleasantly surprised with some of the specs and the speed and performance of if we're referring to the Red Giant plugins. In terms of Cinema 4D, I've noticed similar performance with that compared to my MacBook Pro. The specs are relatively the same in both the graphics card and the processor. And I don't think it's fair to compare the Dell 7560 against my iMac Pro, so I won't. But I will say I'm very, in seeing all of the benchmark tests, especially with third-party renderers, the PC opens up a lot of doors when it comes to performance with Redshift and a few others within Cinema 4D. So I'm excited to see that as well and to try even some external graphic card devices with my PC and comment on that further.
How about you, Ellie? How are you finding it with your work on the iMac?
Yeah, so I've always been Mac. I've never used like a PC, so I have no kind of I can't give any comments on that. But for me, everything works absolutely fine on the Mac. Redshift, have no issues with it, have no drama, and it's all for me it works pretty fast. I do some heavy scenes, and it works.
You have to have Big Sur. That's one caveat for Redshift, isn't it?
Yeah, you do have to be on Big Sur and have the relevant graphics cards for that. But yeah.
Cool. And just to finish up, Chad, what's your take on this?
So I've been a Mac person for like a long time, and then I switched to PC last year, and like I hate it a lot. So it does go faster, but I think of it like if you were like on the top of like a really big hill in your neighborhood and you were on a skateboard, it goes way faster than a Mac for like a lot of like simulations, but it's just like out of control, like as if you were going down a really huge hill on a skateboard. And so like the glitches and the crashes and the nicks and bruises and scrapes are like way more often on a PC as well. So I really miss the Mac experience, even though I do have occasionally faster times. It feels almost like a wash. I was using a 2010 Mac Pro cheese grater until last year that just kept hacking and hacking and hacking until I finally was forced to switch over to PC. And so yeah, it goes faster, but at what price?
Interesting answer. We had a couple of questions about the exact spec of your machine, Ellie, if you wouldn't mind just chucking that in the chat section or
Oh, yeah,
the
sure.
Q&A section. And Aaron's asking a bit more in depth about the future for Redshift and M1 and Cinema. And the what I would say, Aaron, is I put in the questions there. Please reach out to us, training@maxon.net, if your company is trying to make a decision on that, and we can perhaps help with some workflows and delve it into it a bit further, more than we can do right now. Officially, isn't it great that we've got the Redshift engineers and the Cinema 4D engineers all talking to each other? There you go. Was that a political enough answer for you? Did I sit on the fence there? But it is. I mean, there's obviously reasons why we are so excited by that. So I think if you've got further kind of workflow decisions that you need, or other hardware decisions that you need to make about workflows, that's what we're also here for. So please reach out to us, training@maxon.net, for this and other questions that we read everyone, and we love to hear from you. So you've got some things to share about what's happening next week, don't you, Nick? And also this week, in fact.
I do, and I absolutely love this, Simon, the hands-on with Maxon series. Like, having participated with one with Chad and Ellie, and I find it's like one of the best ways to learn about tools is having some hands-on time with exercise files. And this is week 2, if I'm correct, for an introduction to color grading. And you should totally check it out. What day is it taking place on, Simon? Is that Thursday the 12th? That is.
That's right. Yes, that is.
Yeah.
2-hour sessions. It's every Thursday for 6 weeks, and this is the second session. And if you if you missed the first one, you can check out the recording as well. We've got that on the Maxon Training Team site. So we've added that link in some of the question and answers too.
Yeah, it just went up a few hours ago. I just and here's the YouTube Training Team site, so you should totally check that out. And for next week, well, I wanted to say thank you. It looks like Julie is gone. But I wanted to say thank you for her incredible presentation, of course, and Ellie, from learning from you as well about sculpting and Redshift materials. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge.
No, my pleasure. So I've just been answering a few questions in the chat as well. My face has probably been like.
Oh, and I wanted to bring up Julia Simone's. And I wanted to bring up Julia Simone's site for anyone who was curious to see some more of her work. It's you can see it, check it out on the site as well. And this is, well, the wrap up of week 2. But next week we have another special guest, which is super exciting. A Noseman, aka Thanasis, or we can say it the other way around. Thanasis, aka Noseman, is going to be joining us to show us some procedural workflows inside of Cinema 4D. And I'm excited. We drew some inspiration from the show C that's on Apple right now. So if you want, you can go check out the title sequence. It's on Art of the Title and a few other sites that showcase each of the frames. And he did a pretty cool breakdown just using nothing but native Cinema 4D tools. So can't wait for him to break it down and show us some of that work.
Sweet.
I'm going to miss everyone these next few weeks now.
Where are you going?
I'm not going to be here for the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to miss everyone. I'm missing everyone in the chat as well. I feel like I've got a little community now.
I know. We'll miss you, Ellie.
Amazing
Not the
stuff,
same.
though.
Yeah.
I've seen like what's happening for the next few weeks, and I'm super jealous I'm not here.
I'm gonna send you the recording link after, Ellie, just so you can watch it when you're
I'll be a
gone.
part of it.
Yes, on occasion
Draw my
you
face
are
on
allowed
that.
to take time off, but only on occasion.
Awesome. And that's it. That's all. That was it. I wanted to thank everyone out there as well for coming and tuning into this Demystifying series. It means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Cool. So we can't say goodbye. No, you hang up.
No, you hang on a second. I'm waiting for everyone else's lead. Well, it was great seeing everyone, and we can't wait to see you all next week on Monday, same time, 12 Eastern, 9 Pacific.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
All right,
Take care.
Bye.